We are up to chapter 41. Well, actually, we started chapter 41, was it 3 weeks ago? I'm gonna read from the beginning. Well, I know, but in light of the fact that it's been about 3 weeks since we started. Yeah, so I'm gonna start again from the beginning of chapter 41, if that's okay with you, just so that everybody do not remember every word that was said. Page 492. So it is titled A Crash Course in Reverence and Love. So until now, we discussed the various concepts of how a person is meant to serve Hashem, and how invariably a person's avanir, a love and fear of God, act as wings, godfin, as they're called in Aramaic, to escort the mitzvot that we do, the davening that we do, and escort that heavenward to make sure it gets to the proper address. But now we turn to the basic concept of reverence for God. So what is reverence for God, and why is it absolutely necessary? In other words, can I just serve God because I feel like serving Hashem? I'm not some sort of revered feeling at this point. I just want to do it. I don't know. Maybe I just love God. I don't revere God, for argument's sake. Or not the above. I'm not into it thinking more. I'm just going to go through the motions and have no reverence and or for love. Is that cool? Is that ultimately going to take my mitzvah and or my davening, whatever it may be, to the right place? All right, page 492. Bram Sarachlias is the current comment. I've got them in my class, of course. If I hold it far enough, it's fine. No, I have them in the office. Let's see if I can manage here. Okay, Bram Sarachlias is the current Talmud. Raise yourself, way to be carved. I'll get it. Don't worry, then it's fine. But you have to remember always the beginning of worship as well as its ongoing foundation and nourishing root, which is what? That's considered to be reverence and not love. Reverence, bi'ibrit, is a yira, okay? Basic fear, but there's basic fear, which in English you call primal fear. You're just afraid. You're afraid of the dark. You're afraid of the boogeyman. I don't know if they have a boogeyman in Hebrew. How do you say that? Boogeyman. How do you say that? But reverence is a higher level. That something is so great that you have a feeling of reverence in front of it. But so he explains that. Reverence is a basic feeling upon which your relationship with God should be founded. You'll never graduate from the need for reverence. Even as your relationship to Hashem or your worship to Hashem grows, you'll always have to have reverence. It's like the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, from which everything else begins to blossom and grow. So love, as we'll see later, is of extreme importance when it comes to serving Hashem, Avodas Hashem, but it's also, so to speak, the building and not the foundation. Ultimately, when a person does not transgress an avera, sin, why would one not transgress a sin? What reason? Let's say a person has a temptation to sin. And okay, I know I really want to. It's something I really want to do. I'm not going to do it. Why would I not do it? Reverence. You can know it's. But ultimately, it stems from the concept of fear/reverence of God. I don't want to get punished. It's like in any country, when you have a set of laws. Our country, we have a constitution, which sometimes is observed, depending on the day of the week. Okay, but ultimately, there's a constitution or a set of amendments and what have you, from which the Judeo-Christian set of laws, if you will, upon which this country is founded, is what law is the United States. Now, what prevents me from transgressing that law? Let's say I don't agree with law. I don't like the law. I don't want to keep the law. Punishment, police, jail, I don't know, call whatever you want. We have driving laws, right? So there's a speed limit, which many people view as a suggestion. Correct? It says 65. Most of the freeways around here are 65 miles an hour. So it's viewed to a large degree by most people as it's a starting point. So the question is, how much above 65 can I go without getting caught and or getting a ticket? So, officially they always say, well, within 10 miles. Legally, you don't. If you go 66 miles an hour by law, a police officer can pull one over and say, sorry, you sped, I'm giving you a ticket. Now, they generally don't, unless some guy's really had a bad day, a bad hair day, and is being a jerk, okay? I mean, generally, but they could. Okay, so in truth, the 65 miles an hour is not a suggestion. That's the law, or whatever it is. Comes to a stop sign in California has become, in many cases, what's called the California roll. That means that you sort of slow down and roll through the stop sign. No, thank you. That's a California roll, huh? Which is illegal. And actually, police will intentionally sit at certain intersections where people do that and give them tickets because it's dangerous. So the law states you have to stop. You may not like it, may not agree with it. You say, well, there's no one around. There hasn't been anybody here for miles. It doesn't change the law. So that's why we ultimately would not transgress the sin. Now, when it comes to serving Hashem and fulfilling mitzvot, a positive commandment of which there's 248 positive commandments, why would I even do them? Let's say I'm just not in the mood of doing them, or I don't like doing them, I don't feel like doing them. Why would I do them? What would prompt me to want to do any mitzvah, positive commandment? And the answer is, So fear is for not transgressing a negative commandment, punishment. Or, okay, so reward could be part of it, but invariably when you do something for somebody else, somebody that you care about, and you're not in the mood of doing it, your parent asks you, can you please do A, B, C, or D? And you're just not in the mood. I don't know, you're one of those, would you do it anyway? Why?
Brownie points.
Well, but for the will, I mean, the reality is you would do it because there's a certain level of love. There's an innate love that you have for that person. It could be your spouse, it could be your sibling, it could be anybody, it could be a friend. I do it because I care about them, I love them, and therefore I'm going to do it. The same thing applies to positive commandments. Why do I fulfill any mitzvahs I say? Positive commandment, because I have this level of love of Hashem that exists within me. But nonetheless, page 493, it's not sufficient to awaken love alone to do good, and before awakening love, you first need to awaken, if not profound reverence for Hashem, at the very least, innate reverence. That's something which comes beteva, found dormant within the heart of every Jew. Because in reality, no Jew wants, in terms of their core essence, to rebel against God. So we have Jews of all walks of life, every stripe, agnostics, atheists, apikurim, whatever you want, believers, non-believers. We basically encompass the entire spectrum, the whole rainbow of Jews. But deep down, underneath the official title or card carrying a flag that you fly, inside the core of the Jew, there's an neshama, a soul that does not want to rebel against God. You need to awaken this innate reverence so that it should be manifest openly in your heart. And if you can't do that, at least some reverence through focusing your mind, which is under your control. And the way to do so is by reflecting on the greatness of Hashem, in your general thoughts at least. In other words, that before you daven, in many shuls, incidentally, we don't have it in our shul, but many shuls, at the top of the lectern, the Amr, where the chazan stands, there's a verse. What does the verse say? It says, Da lifnei mi ata omed. No, K-N-O-W, but for whom you stand. So when you get up to daven, you're not standing in front of your cell phone or whatever else is going on in your head. No, take a minute, think, I'm going to daven, in front of whom am I davening? In fact, actually, halachically, when it's forbidden to daven in front of a mirror, and or technically speaking, a window in which you see your reflection. Why? What difference does it make? If I'm facing east or Mizrach, wherever you may be, because ultimately you're davening to yourself. I mean, that's what you see in front of you. Even though technically, am I davening to myself? No, but ultimately you don't want to see your reflection right in front of you. You're meant to understand and recognize before whom am I davening? I'm davening in front of Hashem. If for argument's sake there's no choice, or there's 1,000,001 distractions in front of you, you're davening in the airport, which has happened many times in my life, okay, and or an airplane or whatnot. So it's easy to get distracted. There's thousands of people walking by, depending which airport you're in. So at the very least, close your eyes, or at least focus your eyes strictly on the siddur, and don't be checking out what's going on all around you and paying attention to everything else. Okay, that's the bottom line, basic concept of reverence. That's the starting point. Now we start with we go on to a basic meditation before any mitzvah. I guess I'll read this really quickly. Okay, reverence of God is acquired in two phases. First, you simply accept God's authority, even though you don't feel drawn to worship him in your heart. And if it was up to you, you'd rather do something else. It's like being a waiter in a restaurant who obediently, carefully offers service only because he has to, not because he wants to. You think every waiter wants to wait on every person they wait on? No. You have rude people in the restaurant who don't respect the waiter. They do what they have to do because it's their job. Whether the person ordering the food is, you'll pardon the expression, a jerk or not, or whether they're tipped or not, doesn't make any difference. They still have to do their job. The initial phase is referred to as Kabbalah Soil, accepting God's sovereign authority and the beginning of the worship, because it is something that you strongly resist and must force yourself to do so out of necessity. In other words, if your spiritual flame is very weak, and you can't get excited about anything godly, page 494, the solution is to force yourself to accept God's authority. And the second phase, that's phase one. Second phase, you begin not merely to accept, but to internalize and own your feelings of reverence for God so that they manifest in your mind, your heart, and your personality. One is just like the acceptance, the general acceptance of Hashem. Know before whom you're davening. And now all of a sudden I got to sort of own the experience, not just knowing it intellectually. It's got to become a part of who I am. So in the second phase, you begin not merely to accept, but to internalize. And we see both phases, accepting and internalizing, are necessary for proper worship. But the Tanya will start with basic meditation aimed at helping you to accept God's authority at the beginning of worship. This is an extremely important, accessible meditation which ought to be used daily in your struggle against selfish and negative inclinations. Every person who, unless you're a complete tzaddik, has selfish, quote unquote, and negative inclinations. More often than, who do we love more than anyone else in the world? Generally, it's ourselves. Yes, I love my spouse, I love my this, I love my kids. It's true. But the nature of a human being is to love themselves more than anyone else. Okay? So, and therefore, because I love myself more than anything else, I have a certain selfishness attached to myself. If what needs to be done doesn't fit what myself, quote unquote, wants, then we have a problem, right? So now all of a sudden I have to put aside my selfishness or my inclination. That's what he's talking about. So the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is never lazy. It's not like the evil inclination says, I'm tired, I'm going on vacation, have a good time serving God. That has yet to happen since the creation of man. The Yetzer Hara never goes on vacation, never gets tired, and keeps working. If we only had the same work ethic as the Yetzer Hara, we'd all be billionaires. True? Maybe trillionaires. And is very busy and industrious in his efforts to distract a Jew from the service of God. Therefore, you must have a ready weapon with which to combat him. For this reason, I suggest that you study well and learn by heart the beginning of chapter 41 that we're doing now, until these sacred words are engraved upon your mind and memory, so that you'll always be able to recall them and think about them whenever the need arises to overcome the temptation. This is a letter from the Rebbe in 1966. On other occasions, this meditation has been recommended to help with anxiety, depression, laziness, negative thinking, anger and pride, and bad character traits in general. So most people can find one of these, if not multiples of them, that they deal with in life. The meditation explores 4 ideas. 1, the awesomeness of God's power. 2, his energizing presence in the world. 3, his personal relationship with you. And 4, his unwavering interest in you. Those are 4 different levels of meditation that we're going to get to. We're not going to all finish them tonight, but at the very least, to start with in this chapter. First, think of, number 1, his supreme power which rules over all the worlds. The upper and lower. Upper and lower doesn't mean the stratosphere, ionosphere, whatever. It means the spiritual worlds above and the lower worlds down here. Olam Hazeh Gashmi, and then spiritual worlds above. Olamot Elyonim. Your reverence of any authority will be proportionate to that authority's power. God's power is supreme, ruling over the entire universe. So by thinking how God has power over the worlds is not enough. You also need to meditate upon God's presence in the world. First step is to recognize that God runs the whole show, everywhere. God is all pervasive. God is omnipotent. He's omniscient. He's omnipotent, whatever it may be. He's everywhere. But now that I got that, I also have to understand contemplate how, number 2, all existence is saturated with God, who fills all the worlds. That means that there's every element of creation both be it spiritual and or physical, has godliness in it. No matter what you look, this has God in it, that has God in it, the sushi has godliness in it. Certainly the l'chaim has godliness in it after you had it, right? Despite the concealment, and you're very right, by and large, most of the physical world, to us, godliness seems concealed. Perhaps you look at a Torah, okay, you say that looks holy, fine, maybe that makes it holy, or tefillin, or whatever it may be. But by and large, physicality, normal, mundane things, you don't see God everywhere. The save of Kalam and how existence is engulfed in God who transcends all worlds. There's a level of godliness that's too intense to be manifest in anything and remains sort of hovering, makif, around them. But God is all those. As the verse states in Jeremiah, do I not, it's just a rhetorical question, do I not fill heaven and earth? God fills everything. So that's stage number one. The next stage of meditation is to contemplate how you are in a personal relationship with this all-powerful, all-present God, which is a pretty powerful concept. You think about it, people are often awestruck by meeting famous personalities, okay? Whether they are, depending on what makes you awestruck, whether it's a movie star, sports, whatever it is, geniuses of the world, I don't know, whatever floats your boat. So you get awestruck. Why? Why some people, they almost lose themselves, not sure what to say. Blah, 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 blah. Why? They're human beings. They put on their pants one leg at a time, if they wear pants or whatever it may be. They're normal, like anyone else. Well, maybe not normal, but they're human beings. So why we sort of like awestruck? So because to us, they look like they're living almost like an almost otherworldly life to some degree, whatever it may be. When it comes to Hashem, you begin to recognize that all of this, whatever strikes you in an awesome way in this physical world, is really like absolute nothingness relative to the B'Shat Hashem. To think about that for a minute, that should bring a certain level of awe / respect to Hashem. Umaniach, page 495, Umaniach al-yem b'tachtainim, and think how, number 3, he has disregarded the worship of the upper and lower spiritual worlds, and in giving the Torah to us, he specified his desire to be worshipped as king of the people of Israel. So in other words, that Hashem could have just as easily said, you know what, I'm going to take my most precious gift, God's most precious gift, which is what? It's his divine wisdom and his divine will, and he put it into the form of the Torah. And God could have said, I'm going to give this to the angels, to the malachim. I'll give it to Malach Machal, Gabriel, I don't know, Raphael, any of the great angels or other spiritual beings. And what did God do instead? He took his most precious gift and he gave it to whom? To you and I. I feel pretty special. You know what I'm saying? If I'm that important to God, that he gave me the most important thing that exists in God's world, whatever that means, and he gave it to us. So that all of a sudden evokes a certain level of personal relationship, that I have a certain level of importance in God's eyes. But you still think, you might still think of yourself that there are many members of the covenant who worship God. Why is my contribution so important? Okay, so let's say there's, 15 million Jews, for argument's sake, give or take, and roughly 8 billion or so people in the world who also have to worship God. So does my personal worship make such a big difference? If I skip Shabbat one week, is it the end of the world? Or I want to eat something not kosher because it's inconvenient. I can't find the kosher. God will understand. I'm really hungry. It's quasi-kosher. It doesn't say pork on it, so it couldn't be that bad. It may have other things which are questionable. Does it really matter? I mean, is like the world going to come to an end? Is some sort of meteor going to hit the world because of my sin? So a person may think so, but yet still in all, apparently the Tanya adds and says, Bichlal, that is, generally speaking, you have a unique relationship with God due to his covenant with Israel. That's the general consensus of the Jewish people. V'alav befrat, but your relationship, personally, is even more personal than that, since God has indicated his desire to be worshipped by you. In particular, as the Mishnah says, that a person has to say, the world was created for my sake, not in a selfish way. That basically the world is contingent, the existence of the world to a large degree is contingent on what I do or don't do. And he explains the awareness of God's special interest in you ought to be reciprocated. God thinks you're special. He's chosen you as an instrument of his deepest will, and that will make you want to mirror that energy. If you don't think that your response to him is insignificant, don't say to yourself, what could my finite worship mean to an infinite God? Because God is described here as a king, melech, to indicate that your worship matters to him, in contrast to a dictator who imposes his will on others whether they like it or not. The appointment of king depends on public acceptance. It says, "Ein melech b'lo am," there's no king without a people. So if a king doesn't have people under him, then what is he king over? A dictator can decide by dictation that I'm going to rule over everything. But a king, in essence, has to be accepted as the king of the people. Because who are they king over? The king over the people. There's a difference in reality.
Not elected.
What?
Yeah. They're not elected. It's not elected.
It's true, they're not elected, but nonetheless, that if let's, for argument's sake, they are either by son, father, son, or whatever it may be, have become king, and there's no nation to be king over. So shkoyach.
But I mean, in France,
What?
They chop the heads off in France.
Well, that's why I don't live in France.
So they could be copies.
Off with the head, exactly. So for the people to be in a relationship with the king, page 496, and be bound by his rulings, you must first crown him and accept him as their leader, which we do, incidentally, when? When do we crown our king as king? This Jewish holiday is coming up. There we go, thank you. Every year on Rosh Hashanah, we crown God as our king again. It's part of a major part of the liturgy of the davening of Rosh Hashanah. Okay? So as strange as it may sound, God wouldn't be a king without you. He would be a dictator, but not a king, something which requires your acceptance. And since, as we learned above, he has disregarded the rest of the universe, meaning all the upper worlds, other worlds, what have you, and has specified his desire to be worshipped as king by you, in particular, it follows that the entire universe only exists for the sake of your worship. In other words, that the whole world, bishvili, nivra ha'olam, the whole world exists so that I can serve Hashem. And when you accept upon yourself God's sovereign authority that he is to be king over you, you make the whole universal world worthwhile. So that means basically that you and I and every human being is very, very important, without which we wouldn't exist. God doesn't make mistakes, and God doesn't create people because he was bored and decided, I need a few more people to give me a headache. I'll add a few more in that population or that population. Not why we exist. Every one of us has an integral piece of the puzzle. I've used the example before, right? To make sure that that huge mosaic of the world is perfect. The example I've used, I'll just re-illustrate it again for those who are not here, is let's say for argument's sake, you had a million-piece puzzle, which take an awfully long time to make, right? It can take up an entire huge wall of a building or more. And every single piece, it would take you years and years to put it together. Once it's done, right? It's a beautiful mosaic, whatever picture it may be. If there's one piece that's missing, okay, and you looked up close, where do you think your eye's going to go first? To the one piece that's missing. Not to the rest of the beautiful painting. It's going to go, oh, shoot, man, there's something missing. It can be a puzzle of 100 pieces. Doesn't make a difference. Why? Because every piece is integral to make sure that puzzle, that mosaic, what have you, is perfect. Well, the more so when it comes to the creation of the world, that every one of us makes up one of those pieces in the creation of the world for which the entire world was created. And if that person doesn't do what they're supposed to do or does what they're not supposed to do, so then there's like a gaping hole somewhere in that huge mosaic of the world. Okay, enough guilt right now. Moving right along. So when you accept upon yourself God's sovereign authority, so then you to worship him and carry out his will with all the different types of service required from his servant. So you're supposed to serve Hashem in essence like that of a servant. I'll explain shortly that in reality it's really there's a double a duplicit, I guess, two means of serving Hashem. The one that we're focusing in on right now is serving like a servant. Like a servant in front of his master. Meaning that, and he used just the author, not the author of Tanya. The translation used the example of that of a waiter or waitress who may not like the job they're doing or like the people that they're dealing with, but their job is to wait on the people and serve them and the like. And for that, they're getting paid, hopefully, and or tipped and whatnot. When we serve Hashem, there's a concept of servitude as a servant, meaning, what is an eved? A servant doesn't really get an opinion of their own. They're a servant. The servant may not want to do what they're doing. They may not agree with what they're doing. They may be tired or fetchy or hungry. It doesn't absolve them of the responsibility of being the servant to serving the master. And in essence, to a degree, that's how our service Hashem is meant to be, with that concept of Kabbalah soul, of accepting the yoke of heaven upon ourselves. A yoke meaning that, okay, I don't feel like it, but I guess this is what I got to do. So I'm going to do it anyway. We use the example of the army. For those who've been in the army, I have not, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm willing to bet that not everything they ask you to do in the army, particularly in basic training, is something that you want and feel like doing. Any corrections?
No.
No corrections. I'm sure it's not. It's not pleasant, you know what I mean? Part of it is disciplining you and breaking you and what have you, and making you run when you don't. Where am I running to? I just run. Don't ask questions. Come on, get up, get down, whatever the story may be. Okay, the final section, this meditation encourages you to contemplate number four, that is God's vigilance over all your actions and his intimate awareness concerned with what you are doing. This is a famous pasuk. The Rebbe actually formulated or came together with what's known as the 12 psukim. These are 12 verses, largely from Chumash or other places of Navi, that the Rebbe took and had children from all over the world recite as a means of adding purity and Yiddishkeit into the world and to memorize those psukim. So this is one of the 12 psukim. V'hine Hashem nitzav alav, and look, God is standing over you, and all the earth is filled with his glory. Umabit alav, he's watching you, and he's checking inclinations and heart to see if you're worshiping him properly. In other words, there's no hiding from the boss. A person may say, okay, I'll just close the door, I'll turn off the lights, no one can see, right? Well, guess who no one is that can't see? God can see everything, and God is constantly looking. He's constantly looking to see if we are serving him as he would like. And therefore, you ought to worship him with awe and reverence, and your awareness of his presence should be palpable and tangible as if you were standing right in front of the king. So you might imagine that by letting go and accepting God's authority, you will be unhealthily denying your needs, urges, and individuality. In other words, do I not want to be an individual? Do I just want to be part of the pack? Do I not want to have my own opinions and sort of assert my will at times? In reality, the opposite is true. Your sacred inner core, which subconsciously influences all of your thoughts and interactions with others, desperately needs to surrender itself like a burning flame needs oxygen. Self-centeredness starves that flame. When a person is self-centered, then the rest of the world around them doesn't exist. It starves the flame, the yearning of wanting to connect to Hashem, connect to other people, and the like. So he says, letting go. So by letting go, you don't deny yourself, you discover yourself. This isn't something that erodes your identity. In the contrary, it is your identity. So often in order for a person to come to understand who they are truly, deep in themselves, sometimes, so people go to all kinds of extremes. You can go to, say, ayahuasca, and you take ayahuasca and go to Machu Picchu, whatever it is, and, and have the whole self-discovery shrooms experience. I don't necessarily recommend that, but nonetheless, that's one thing people do. They go to all kinds of other self-help groups. You go to the ashram, they go to the place, they sit in the yoga position for a couple of years, whatever it may be. Why? Because they're trying to figure out who they are. That's ultimately what they're doing, right? Sort of to deny the rest of the world, or to go back somewhere in my head to understand why I'm doing what I do, etc., as opposed to the classic, certainly in the Western culture, who do you blame for all of our problems? Our parents. We start with our parents. It's not my fault. It's my mother's fault. It's my father's fault. It's my grandfather's, my great-grandfather's, my teacher's fault. It's everyone else's fault in the world but mine, because I'm not at fault, right? So people, as they mature, start to try to figure, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. It could be there's other issues beyond finger pointing, which doesn't solve anything. I'm not saying that every parent is perfect. They're not. And every teacher is perfect. They're certainly not. But nonetheless,
Present company accepted.
yes, I mean, I didn't want to say the obvious, but nonetheless, thank you. But in reality, pointing fingers and blaming everyone else for my problems is never going to solve my problems or my issues or my struggles in life. So then people seek out all kinds of various other means of trying to come to the truth. Tanya can save you a lot of money. Okay. A lot of the self-help groups traveling to Peru, the place, wherever people are going to do their thing. And invariably, and what's really key is by letting go, which is hard for many people because often it's an egotistic type of thing. I don't want to let myself go. If I let my guard down, then who am I? I gotta assert myself. If I let go, then I become the weakling. It's not true. It's a self-perception. I don't mean that you walk around like a schmata, but a person is willing to let go, to recognize who they are, that they're fallible human beings, and they do and need to own up to their own mistakes, and recognize that they can correct them and change them if they want to. It's a discipline. Page 497. And one should think deeply about all of this at length. However much your mind and thoughts can grasp, and according to your time constraints, especially before studying Torah or performing a mitzvah, such as the daily worship of donning talsit tefillin. To explain now why he uses these two in particular, these two mitzvahs as an example. Okay, I'm going to skip all the rest of the reading part here. You can read just some trying to get through some of this. So, what unless he explains it, he does explain it over there. Now about the talsit tefillin. No, it's fine. Okay. I'm sorry? The what?
Did read the two sections and there was something.
He's going to explain it. He's going to explain in the next section in the text itself. So, page 498. So, the first meditation above was a basic preparedness and willingness to let God into your life, to accept God's sovereign authority. A second phase, which you will aim for in the following three meditations, is a feeling of genuine reverence, a deeper connection where you progressively absorb and internalize the reality of God and pull upon yourself God's blessed infinite light. The Gam Yizbanim, and you should also contemplate how the blessed infinite light, which fills the worlds and transcends all worlds, is a divine will expressed in an undiluted fashion in the Torah you're reading, in its texts and ideas, or in these tzitzis or tefillin, tzitzis/talis, that you're putting on. And by reading the Torah text or putting on the actual physically putting on the talis or tefillin, you pull upon yourself God's blessed light. So in other words, when I'm fulfilling a mitzvah, what am I doing? I'm actually pulling God's divine light onto myself. It always exists. It's there everywhere in the world, but sometimes it's somewhat removed. The difference is it's always accessible to me. If I want to bring godliness down into me, into my personal self, I can do so. Anytime I do a mitzvah, that's what I'm doing. The more mitzvot, the more godliness I'm bringing into my life. Dahainu, al chelach leikamin mal. This way, the way this works is that the light is pulled upon your divine soul, your neshama, which is what? A piece of God above, which means that you actually have a part of God in you. It's an inescapable part. So I said before, you can have Jews that have they profess all types of philosophies. Any ism pretty much we started. Marxism, communism, I don't know. I'm not sure about Taoism. What? Humanism. Exactly. The Jews were involved, either who started it or involved in it. Okay. But the truth of the matter is that every Jew, no matter what ism they somehow subscribe to, they still have a neshama inside themselves, a part of God, no matter how far they've run. Shebeseicha gufay, which is inside your body and engages your body in the mitzvah act, causing you to be absorbed and lose your separate identity with God's blessed light. So in other words, that every time you do a mitzvah, basically what you're doing is weakening your ego. Because your ego and God can't coexist in the same place simultaneously. So every time I do a mitzvah, I'm pulling God into me, which in turn is sort of ridding now whatever space or partial space that ego took up, that's out. And now God's taking that spot. The more mitzvahs I do, the more the ego begins to find some other resonance. The derech prat b'tefillin, and he says, and this specifically, in particular with the case of tefillin, page 499, the botel v'lichal b'chinas chachmasai contemplate that the chachma, the inquiry or wisdom, and bina, the cognition powers of your divine soul, should lose their identity and be absorbed in the chachma and bina powers of God. In other words, like we, in our own contemplative powers, right, our intellect, we have chachma, bina, dat, which happens to be the acronym for Chabad. Chachma being literally translates as wisdom, bina, understanding, dat, knowledge, but more specifically, as he explains it here, chachma being the contemplative or inquiry part of things, bina being that of the cognition, and then das we'll get to shortly. So a mitzvah, as we've just seen, dissolves your body and soul into God's light. And tefillin, in particular, targets the mind, in particular, allowing your mental powers to be raised up and absorbed in God's mental powers. Why tefillin, as opposed to any other mitzvah, does it have that ability to somehow connect my chachma and bina, my wisdom and understanding, with God's wisdom and understanding? And he explains that the tefillin, if you look, there's I don't have a pair of tefillin here, but the showroll, I do have a pair of tefillin here. This for demonstrative sorry, is it say that name right? Demonstrative purposes. I'll show you that the tefillin, the shorosh, there's one part of the tefillin goes on the head, opposite the brain, the other one goes on the arm, opposite the heart. So you'll notice the shorosh one has four, you can see there's four sections here, right? Everybody see that? So inside, this is actually sewn together with a like a sinew of a cow. It's not regular thread. That's to be actually, that halakhically, it has to be sewn together with that. So technically, even though this looks like it's all closed up as one box, but you can look at it closely, there's a small crack that goes along the bottom, because in reality, this can be opened. And anytime you have a check by your sofa, they will open it up. And you'll have to take like a thin blade and to cut through the paint, to be painted afterwards to make it look nice. But the point is that inside here, it's not just four lines on the outside, there's actually four sections in the actual tefillin itself. Incidentally, this is all made out of one piece of leather. So they have to take a flat piece of leather, and it's placed into a mold that has the ability to make these four sections. They use like these metal pieces, they knock it in, it sits in there for months and months and months till it dries out. So you have a proper mold, and then they trim it and cut it till it looks perfectly square. That's the gist of how it's done. But point is that there's four different parshiot, four different sections of Torah on pieces of parchment that exist in every one of these. They're folded up and and also wrapped together with a piece of the sinew, if you will, and then placed into these four sections. So what he's done, so look at that. So that is now referring to in this is that in the tefillin, the first of the parshiot that are mentioned there is the one of Bahaya Kiviyacha. I'm sorry, of Kaddish Licha B'Far. So it says the first one is from the verse that says, "Sanctify to me every firstborn, the first of each womb." And that has the energy of God's Chachma, the first stage of divine emanation towards the creations, which like a womb opens a whole flow of mercy and supernal light. That's the first parsha, first section. The second one is V'haya Kiviyacha. And the passage inside the film beginning with the words, "Then there will come a time when you will be brought by God into the land of Canaan," meaning to the land of Israel, has the energy of God's Bina, hinted to by the fact that the Torah mentions the Exodus from Egypt 50 times, biblically, and that corresponds to what's known to the 50 gates of Bina, Nun Shari Bina. There are 50 gates of understanding of godliness. It says that the Jews actually, when we were in Egypt, we descended to the 49th gate or level of impurity. One more, and you and I would be owning real estate in Cairo. We would have never left Egypt. Okay, if we were that close to the bottom of the barrel, mired in the muck of impurity and depravity and the like. But when we came out of Egypt, we ascended from that to the 49th level of Bina, of understanding. The 50th one we could not, as human beings, achieve on our own. That had to be given by Hashem. But there are 50 gates. So the point of the matter is that the second parsha in your tefillin relates to the concept of Bina, okay, the idea of the 50 gates of understanding, paralleling the 50 times in Torah that it mentions about the time when the Jews will be brought into the land of Israel. And so the result of your meditation on the first two passages of Tefillin should be the feeling that you're not going to use your soul's Chachma and Bina for anything other than God alone. So worshiping God doesn't mean you lose all sense of rationality and intuition. God doesn't want you to become a robot. He gave you mental power so that you dedicate them to his worship, and putting on tefillin helps you to do that because it floods your powers of inquiry and cognition with divine light. Basically, you're bonding your intellectual powers with God's intellectual powers. There's a real strong synergy that's happening at that moment, whether you're conscious of it or not. In the second half of this meditation, we turn to the power of tefillin to refine your emotions. So now we were talking about, until now, refining your intellect. So how does that affect my emotions? What's the seat of my emotions? Seat of my intellect is my brain, my head, right? Seat of my emotions is my heart. So in the second part of the meditation, we turn to the power of tefillin to refine your emotions. As we learned above, the transition from thinking to feeling takes place via the agency of das, of recognition, discernment. Okay, it translates literally as knowledge. I said I would explain what the third of your intellective powers is, known as da'at, or das, as we say as Ashkenazis. You understand my Ashkenazis? Okay, so it's discernment or recognition through which, page 500, ideas become personally relevant. And this leads to the entire range of human emotions, which broadly speaking fall into two categories of chesed, of kindness or love, and fear. In other words, when I feel something emotionally, why am I having an emotional response to anything? What precipitates that emotional response? It's a question. Anybody's free to participate at your own risk. Okay, so those would true. So those would help to evoke a certain emotion. In other words, let's say a person cries. Why are they crying?
Sad or angry.
Okay, good. So what made them become sad?
Loss.
And how do you identify with that? By using your intellect. You're all correct. But I was trying to get to the source of it, which is your intellect. In other words, if you don't understand that this is something that makes you sad, then you won't be sad. If you don't understand this is something that makes you happy, you won't be happy. It takes a certain level, first and foremost, of Chachma and Bina, and then Da'at in particular, right? The discernment where all of a sudden now it becomes part of me. It's not just some sort of intellectual concept. We can have a lot of different academic pursuits, whatever they may be. Do they all affect me? Like really, do I relate to every one of those academic pursuits on a very personal level? No. I can read a lot of things and either it resonates or doesn't resonate with me, whatever it may be, okay? Nothing against Shakespeare. I'm sure he was a great writer. But I had to read him in high school, and he and I just didn't resonate. What can I tell you? You know what I mean? I'm sure he was a great writer. I just didn't get the whole thing. That's probably my own problem. But nonetheless, I read it because I had to read it. It was mandated reading in school.
In the yeshiva?
Yeah, believe it or not. The yeshiva, New England Hebrew Academy, Boston Baptist Yeshiva. I didn't read all of Shakespeare. Some of Shakespeare I had to read The Crucible from, I don't know if you read these books in school. Exactly. Do I relate to that? I mean, yeah, it's an interesting story, you know what I mean? And I don't know about the witches and Seven Houses, Seven Gables. It all sounds fantastic. But, was I worried that there were witches in Salem in those days? Not a whole lot. I've been to Salem, Massachusetts. I've actually been to the House of Seven Gables. Okay? Gone to visit the site, quote unquote. I didn't walk around feeling fearful because that there was going to be some sort of curses and what have you, witches coming out with brooms and boiling cauldrons, whatever it was. It didn't resonate with me. Das means that whatever it is, it really, I feel it to the extent that there's an emotional response. Whatever the response may be, it could be happiness, sadness, or anything. That's what da'at is, or das. And that your soul's power of das should lose its separate identity and be absorbed with God, das. In other words, that my response and what my emotions are not just my emotions. My emotions should really be bound up in essence with the godly emotions. Meaning, that since it is das that gives rise to all emotions, beginning with what? Chesed and Gvura, which are the idea of Av and Yira. Chesed, kindness, Gvura, strength or discipline. When your das becomes absorbed in God's, it automatically incorporates your Chesed and Gevura, your kindness and strength, which are the reverence and love in your heart. So when you put on tefillin, all of this becomes absorbed in God's supernal das, which incorporates his Chesed and Gevura. In other words, it affects not only your intellect, but also your emotions. That's just one mitzvah, by the way, the mitzvah of tefillin. Hamaluvish b'parshas, the other two passages in the tefillin express God's chesed and gevura. How? So the other, remember, it's four passages in the arm tefillin. There's actually all four of them are in the head tefillin. And the arm tefillin, all four of them exist also, but in one long strip, not in four separate sections. So if you've ever seen what a parsha looks like inside the parshiot, the parchments, but the arm one, let's say, is about yay long. It's rolled up, but it only has one. It's like one compartment inside, not separated into four separate ones. And the head one, it's four sections. So one of the third one is the parsha of Shema Yisrael Shema Elokeinu. Okay, that corresponds to Chesed, and then because it's what's next verse after the Shema, V'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, you shall love the Lord your God. Chesed, kindness. Question from the audience.
Yeah, because obviously this is worn by men. So what's the equivalent for women?
There is no equivalent for women. No, this mitzvah in particular, that of tefillin, is for men. You're correct. And I'll answer your question. Let me just finish this thought, and then I'll get to it in a second. And then the fourth one, which is that of Ahayim Shemaya, and the passage beginning, and if you will listen, corresponds to Gevura. Why? Because what does it say? If you listen to God, then everything, your rains will come at the right time, you'll be blessed. Since it speaks of divine anger, because it says, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, God will get angry, God forbid, and the rest of the Shema. Beware not to let your heart be lured away, and the anger of God will be kindled against you. And this entire meditation is really an elaboration of the basic requirements stated in the Code of Jewish Law, that when you put on tefillin, it's l'shabar alev ha'mayach v'chuli. When putting on tefillin, you ought to contemplate that you are placing your heart and mind exclusively in God's service. So yes, there's a physical wrapping and motion and whatnot that goes on, and whether a person is conscious of the aforementioned, maybe after this you will be more conscious of it, but even if a person is not conscious of it, at the very least, there is this synergistic type of relationship that's happening between the person's intellect and or arm. I'll get to your question one second. When I was just in Spain now, so one of the cities we went to visit was Girona, which is about an hour or so, or give or take, north of Barcelona. So we were given a tour. There's one Frum guy that actually lives in Girona. He gave us a Frum tour, which is actually much more interesting than many of the other tour guides, because it was like sort of the story behind the story of many of the buildings of some of the greatest commentators that I studied in yeshiva who lived there, whether it was the Ran, the Rashba, the Ramban, etc. So many of their commentaries were written in the same, some in the same building that we went to visit some 1300s, 700, 800 years ago. So there was another group that was there from New York, two guys, two people, a husband and wife, and they had their own tour guide, and they had come from Barcelona. So whatever they came into, there's a shul. Okay, there's the shul / Chabad house. It's not formally Chabad house, but the guy who runs it sort of runs it like a Chabad house, etc. He's the one from guy there. And they came in, And he offers them a drink, whatever. They can come in and they can take a tour, and they see it has a bunch of Jewish memorabilia and various displays. So I asked their tour guide. I said to him, and he spoke Hebrew and English, but I could tell he was Russian simply because of his accent. I said to him, you want to put on tefillin? He says, I'm in the middle of working. I said, if your clients don't mind, do you put on tefillin? He'll cool. He says, if they're okay, because I'm working. So I said to them, do you mind if he puts on tefillin? They were religious. So sure, it'd be our pleasure. Let him put on tefillin in the initial. So I put on tefillin with him. We said Shema, what have you. And then afterwards, he was reluctant initially. He kept thanking me and thanking me and thanking me repeatedly, okay, that for the opportunity of having put on tefillin. Not only that, we bumped into them again. I took a train from Barcelona. It's like a 40-minute train ride. We bumped into them in the train station on the same train as us, going back to Barcelona, where once again he thanked me for this opportunity. For me, it wasn't a big deal. It took 2 minutes, 3 minutes. For him, it resonated deeply. What was his story? He told me that he was hired as a photographer by the Chabad rabbi in Barcelona. So there was a gathering of all the Chabad rabbis in Europe in the shul in Girona. In 2017. And he was a photographer. He was hired as a photographer. And then the rabbi asked him if he puts on tefillin. He says, no, but whatever. And he says, if I give you a pair of tefillin, you put them on every day. He says, as a gift, they're expensive. He says, so he was masking, and he says, I took them, and he says, and in his words, I broke my promise, meaning that he has not put them on every day. So he says, honestly, me putting on again the tefillin now sort of brought me back to my promise. This is from 2017. This is like 8 years ago. Obviously, evoked a very strong reaction within him. It was a quick thing. Did he understand all of that I just mentioned over here? Probably not. He probably doesn't even know it exists. But deep down, it speaks to the soul. To answer your question about a woman. So a woman is not mechuyev, is not responsible halachically to put on tefillin, and they're not responsible to fulfill any time-bound mitzvot. Simple reason for it is because, first and foremost, by and large, women, certainly once they marry and raise children, their primary focus should be able to raise a family. And physically speaking, you can't time-bound mitzvot. You don't have time for. Okay? Ask any mother how much free time she has. The only free time she has when she can hide herself in the closet, lock the door, and eat Twizzlers so the kids don't see it. That doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So that's on a very physical level. But on a spiritual level, it says that women are given a certain level of innate spirituality that they're born with that men don't have. That in order for a man to be able to achieve that level of spiritual connection to God, they have to do these time-bound mitzvot, like that of tefillin or a talit or whatever it may be, that a woman doesn't need to do, because a woman automatically has this deeper spiritual connection to God, and this is not necessary for them to create that. Whereas a man needs to do these things to be able to evoke and can make that connection happen. So,
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. There were some certain women that put on tefillin. It says Rashi's daughters. Rashi was probably the most famous commentator on Chumash, lived about 1,000 years ago. It is said that his daughters put on tefillin some great rebbes. It's certainly not a common practice, was never a common practice, and that's the legend out there that but they were also lived on a whole different plane. His daughters are basically the ones who were responsible for writing his commentary. Okay, I don't think he was actually written by Rashi. He was taught by Rashi, and it is said that his daughters wrote basically his comments. It's one of the most famous commentators in all of Torah. It's on the entire Torah, all 5 books of Moses. It's also on not the entire Talmud, but a good part of it. I mean, the amount of information that he conveyed in his lifetime is mind-boggling. How anybody can, even the Rambam himself, who lived, 200-300 years later, what he also achieved in his lifetime and wrote, you think, how could they physically be able to do this? The Rambam, who incidentally was from Spain, Cordoba, not from Barcelona, in addition to writing his great magnum opus known as the Yad HaChazaka, goes through every single mitzvah in the Torah, one of the few extant writings today, that explains every one of the 613 commandments. There's not a lot of authors that beyond the Chumash itself, okay, who took every mitzvah and explained them in a paragraph 2 or whatever it may be of every single mitzvah. There's the Rambam, there's the Smag, Sefer Mitzvahs Hakdolot, a few. but that's basically considered to be like a seminal writing that's used till today. But beyond that, he was also a philosopher, a doctor, astronomer. He was a doctor of the Sultan, whatever he was in those days back in Egypt. I mean, how he managed all this while fleeing, incidentally, at some point, a bunch of radical Muslims he had to run from Spain because they wanted to kill him, who were chasing him. So it's like mind-boggling, and then we don't have enough time to do what we're doing. So
Like he was type A personality.
I didn't know on a personal level. He's buried in the holy city of Tiberias, of Tiberia. There are 4 holy cities, as they're known in Israel. But I call the 4 holy cities Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, as you all know. Then there's Hebron, which is the cave where the cave of the patriarchs is. There's the city of Tiberias and the city of Tzfat, or Safed, as they call it in English. Those are known as the 4 holy cities. Tel Aviv didn't make the mark yet. We're still working on a few things. No? So that Maskeret Batya, on the other hand, is right behind where he comes from.
No, that's-
From Hebron. She was born in Hebron? Oh,
Kiryat-
really?
Kiryat.
It says Chumash says Kiryat Bat Hi Hebron Eretz Canaan. That's what the Chumash says. A Kiryat Arba, which is, I mean, it's just outside what we commonly know today as it's higher up in the hill. You take the hill down and takes you into Hebron. More Jews today, the population of Jewish people is greater in Kiryat Arba than in Hebron because of the Israeli government's policies, much of which they don't allow the expansion of the Jewish community in Hebron. Make it very difficult to expand anyway.
Today,
Yeah, you
we
spent-
read that, the Knesset, they voted that,
For settlement.
Judea and Samaria should become part of Israel.
Correct. So, but I'm not sure if they voted yet to expand the Jewish Community Center, the JCC of Hebron. Eventually,
Yeah.
listen, whatever, you've been to Hebron with JLI?
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of, okay, I guess that ends today's class here, so until next week.
Yes,
And
I
can
know.
can we be over and out here? We get distracted periodically.